Good evening. My name is Steve Martin, and I have the pleasure of moderating tonight's forum for our school board candidates for the March elections. There are 4 candidates for the position of school board member: Amy Clark Canty, Gary Daniels, James Powers, and Judy Zano. 3 of the 4 candidates are here tonight, and on behalf of the citizens, I want to thank you for coming and answering questions. I have shared these guidelines with the candidates prior to the forum. I want to just cover them briefly so that those watching understand the guidelines the candidates are working under. First and foremost, the questions were not shared with the candidates prior to the forum. Also want to remind we are not taking any live questions. Second, I am going to ask each candidate to make a short introductory statement on their background, preferably not more than a couple of minutes. I'm asking them not to make any statements about why they think they should be considered for your vote at this time. They will be closing remarks, and at that time they can summarize their candidacy. Each candidate will be asked to respond to every question, and I am calling on the candidates in alphabetical order. And as we progress through the questions, each candidate will move down a slot. So Judy, Amy will get the first introductory comment. Gary will get the first question, and then, Judy, you'll get the first answer for the second question. So that way there, we're going to spread out whoever has to answer first and whoever has the benefit of answering last. And lastly, I will ask each candidate to basically summarize their qualifications and why they would like you to consider voting for them in March. I'm hoping not to have to strictly enforce the time limit. I will tell you I received more questions this year than I received last year. Although interestingly, last year the questions were all over the place. This year, all questions except for one were around one of 3 subjects, and I'm kind of guessing the candidates already probably know what the hot buttons are in the town. But with that, we're going to start, and I'm going to ask Amy if she would start out with her opening comments.
Yeah, hi, I'm Amy Clark Canty. I have lived in Milford since 2014 full-time, but my family has lived in Milford for over 100 years. I grew up vacationing here. I am a teacher for the past 18 years. I have a few degrees in the subject. I'm about 6 classes away from my doctorate of education. I've been an English teacher, a reading specialist, a special educator, and right now I'm an RTI coordinator. I can also basically teach teachers how to teach. That's another one of my certifications. But basically, service has been super important to me all my life, including in college when I did Army ROTC. So I have a lot of background in education and leadership, and I am happily married to my husband of almost 25 years together and 19 married this summer, I think, and then 2 little girls that are learning right now in our school district.
Thank you. Gary?
Thank you. Good evening. For those who don't know me, my name is Gary Daniels, and I've lived in Milford for over 50 years. My wife Lorraine and I have 6 children. Politically, I've served Milford at the State House for 6 years as your state senator, 4 of those years chairing the Senate Finance Committee, and 18 years as a state representative. Locally, I was elected to the Milford School Board for 6 years. I've served as a Milford selectman for 20 years, and I served 6 years as your school district moderator. I'm a military veteran, 3 years actively with the U.S. Army, 3 years with the New Hampshire Army National Guard, and 5 years with the U.S. Army Reserve. And educationally, I graduated from Milford High School and have degrees from New Hampshire Technical Institute and New Hampshire College. The experience that I gained in serving in all those different areas of government have been valuable as it relates to what the board will be facing academically, financially, and socially. My goal is to address those needs and deficiencies that will better position Milford students for the next step in lifelong learning. But to accomplish that, we're going to need parents, teachers, administrators, students, and the board working together to open up those potentials for students to position themselves for the best careers.
Thank you, Gary. Judy?
Hi, I'm Judy Zano. My husband Bart and I have lived in Milford for 35 years as of this October. We have 2 grown children and 3 grandchildren. I spent the first half of my life working in business and then came to my senses and became a teacher, and spent another 20 years as a teacher and then several as an administrator here at the Milford High School. And when I retired, I felt that, first of all, I was young enough not to be totally retired, but thought that the best way to use my time was in service to the town. And that is the track I decided to take. It has been an interesting 3 years. I was elected on a Tuesday, and on Sunday we closed public schools because of COVID. So it certainly has been an interesting trajectory. I read several years ago that the leading indicator for success for students in a school district is a stable school board and a stable superintendent. And I want to make that happen in Milford. I want our kids to get the best we can offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Okay, the first 2 questions are actually mine, and same ones I asked last year. So the first question will go to Gary for the answer, and it is, what are your top 3 priorities for the school district, and what are your 3 recommendations for implementing these steps?
Okay, the first one I would say is communication. I feel that right now the district is lacking in communication. And right now I think that's a recipe for failure, and one of the reasons we're not able to take care of the difficult issues that we do. That starts with an agenda that presents itself as a one-way communication, because there is a public comment period of time on there where people can come in and speak, but they're not allowed to ask questions. The board won't answer the questions, and they're timed to 3 minutes. And so the perception is that the board is more interested in making sure that no one talks beyond their 3 minutes than they do in listening to the concerns of the public. Secondly, I think we're facing some major renovation proposals that are going on right now, and while we're still taking input on those things, there are other factors further on down the road that need to be factored in. I believe that some of the experience that I have from the state level will assist us in at least trying to figure out whether this is a good thing or a bad thing in terms of financials in the building, and whether we can do it less expensively. And then and I think that, frankly, Steve, I think that there's a few more than 3, but the other thing that I believe that we really need to get together with is the whole idea of respect. Respect among all parties, whether it's the students, the teachers, the administration, staff, the board. That's getting in the way of being productive as a board.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. Judy, same question.
Okay.
I can repeat the questions too if you'd like.
No, thank you. I think, as Mr. Daniels said, there are certainly more than 3, but I want the best way that we can provide education for our students. The 3 priorities that I have are the retention of staff, which has been very, very difficult over the last 3 to 4 years. I mean, it's virtually everywhere in the country that we have a problem with getting teachers. And in Milford, we have successfully filled every position for all 3 years. It's taken juggling, and we've had to put in some workarounds, I guess is the right way to put it. But we haven't just left empty classrooms. We've come up with solutions for them. So I think that has to be one of our issues, is retention of staff at every level, from teaching, administration, support staff. We need to be mindful. I think that I know Mrs. Michaud, Mr. Clayman, and I have worked on several different occasions with union leadership to try to help solve this problem, and we continue to work hard. Another priority is coming up with a really solid curriculum, which is something we don't have and which our students desperately need. And I think that was one of our goals a few years ago until a few things got in the way. And so I know that Mr. Motika has been working tirelessly with staff on curriculum, but I would really like to see a K through 12, a seamless curriculum for all of our students. And the last thing that I would speak to is communication. The board actually did have a communication session where we had questions and answers. We did it in the fall. But then we ran into the holidays and then the election, because once we started doing the election process, there was a feeling of this might not be a good way to situate in terms of questions and answers. Our Community Engagement Communication Committee is planning to schedule, I think, 5 or 6 in the spring, so that we can answer people's questions, because it's frustrating. It's very frustrating not to be able to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Amy?
Yeah. I think my number one priority is sort of healing relationships, I guess is the way to put it. I think that there's a lot of tension in a lot of different areas between stakeholders, whether it's staff, students, the board, taxpayers, parents, and we really need to all work together to educate our children, and we can't do that if we're not really listening to each other. So we really need to all take a breath and maybe a little bit of a step back and start listening to each other and communicating effectively. I think as a board, there's things that we can do, like having question and answer sessions and ensuring that if we get, for example, an email from a parent, making sure that if their concern wasn't addressed at, say, the principal level or the teacher level where it was supposed to start, then try to find out why that is, making sure that there's transparency in that communication. I know that as a teacher myself, it can also be frustrating when you have a student concern and you don't know what happens after you ask for that help. So making sure that there is that communication happening between all parts. That's a big thing that will help us, and one of my main priorities. Another thing that we need to work on, and sort of number 2, is creating a fiscally responsible plan for our district. We have a lot of maintenance that needs to be addressed. We have plans for construction and renovations, and we need to figure out a way that's feasible to do this, and so we can create that best possible environment for our students. And I would say the third thing is related to staff. And that is, we've lost a lot of administration and staff members in general over the past few years. And, as Judy said, you can't continue to operate because teachers are in admin. We are the ones in the trenches. We're the ones that see what happens day to day with the students. We're in the classrooms. So if there's turnover with staff, it's really hard to build relationships with families and with students. So we really need to make sure we're not only recruiting but retaining people so we can continue to build a strong relationship. Milford used to have that. We'd have very little turnover a few years back. I'd like to get back to that and make our school district the best possible one we can. And a big part of that is by making it a positive, kind, supportive community. And I know that we are that. I think we just need to start showing that a little bit more.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the second question, what do you see as the most important part or role of a school board member? Is it budgeting? Is it health and safety of students and staff? is it being a voice for the taxpayers? And Judy, you're first on the line for this one.
Okay, Steve, could you just ask the question again? I'm sorry.
What do you see as the most important part of a role of a school board member?
Right.
Is it budgeting? Is it health and safety of students and staff? Or is it being a voice for the taxpayers?
I think I would prioritize those, but my number one priority would be the health and safety of staff and students. I think if people feel unsafe, that it's tough to learn when you're not in a safe place. It's difficult to teach when you're not in a safe space. And I think that that's what we owe our students every day. That's what we owe our staff every day, is an environment in which they can work. I think we need to do that within the budget and with the responsibility for taxpayers. But I truly believe that I've read the studies about students who feel uncomfortable in a classroom, and I understand that that's not always we're not always going to be able to make it perfect, but we can try. And I think that's the best that we can offer, is to try to make sure that the environment stays safe and healthy.
Okay. Thank you. Amy?
I would say students first, always. They are why we have a school district, so students and staff need to come first. Students can't learn if they feel unsafe. Like, that's just how it is. And whether that's physically or emotionally, there's a hierarchy of needs called, by Maslow. And if you look at that and read a little bit about that, you learn that if students aren't in a space, and that's for them to feel, or for staff to feel too, to learn, there's nothing that's going to go into their brain that they're going to remember, they're going to keep. They're not going to create those transferable skills. They're not going to have learning experiences that last, which is really what we want. We want kids to learn, to transform themselves, to be able to achieve their goals. And if they're not in a safe and healthy environment, then that's not going to happen. If staff feel the same way, then they're not going to take risks as teachers to try new things and be innovative as teachers. So they need to feel safe as well. Then I would say it's really taxpayers / budget at the same time, because the taxpayers are what give us our money, but we have a budget that we have to be accountable to. So those two things obviously go hand in hand, but the job of a school board is to govern a school district, and you can't do that without students and staff. So,
Thank you. Gary?
Thank you. The district has some 215 policies that cover the realm of safety to delegating responsibilities, things like that. So I believe that the safety part of it, which is certainly essential, is already taken care of in that. The board, I believe, needs to set the environment. We need to work to assemble the team that is going to get the job done. We need to empower the teachers to be able to do what they were trained to do, which is teach. Letting them use their creativity to make education exciting and fun and adventuresome for the students. Keep them energized. We need to review those policies, because right now many of them conflict with one another, and I think that's part of the problem. But in doing so, we need to make sure that the board is not micromanaging the process. We're going to leave that to the superintendent and the teachers. However, the board should hold accountable the administrators and the teachers to the expectation of the parents and the policies of the board. And I will say that the teachers should also hold students accountable to the tasks that are assigned to them, including the timeframes in which those tasks are to be accomplished. Financially, we've seen the cost grow, enrollment goes down, assessment scores are staying relatively flat. We need to be able to change that dynamic, because that should not be acceptable to the taxpayer. I, for one, don't mind paying a little bit more if I'm seeing the quality education come out. But what I'm really concerned about is that I have talked to the chancellor at the community colleges, and between 20 and 30% of the kids that go on to the college aren't ready to do college work. They need to take remedial courses or somehow take courses to catch up. So what I think the board needs to do is to make sure that that system is aligned so that when students graduate from high school, that they're ready for the workforce, for the trade institutions, for the colleges.
Thank you. Next question. If approved, the proposed operating budget and the MEPA contracts will result in a 2.5% school tax rate increase. How much does the school tax rate increase when the 1.7 million of lost revenue is factored in? And Amy, you're first on this one.
Could you say that again?
If approved, the proposed operating budget and contract will result in a 2.5% school tax rate increase. How much does the school tax rate increase when the 1.7 million of lost revenue is factored in?
How much does it increase when you factor in the lost revenue?
Yes.
I honestly would need to look at that because honestly, your question doesn't make sense to me. Quite honestly, we have a budget that was set that factored in a lot of different things. So quite honestly, I'm not really sure what you're asking.
Okay.
Like we need to make more, get more revenue? Like I'm not really sure.
The school district is going to receive, according to the question, actually, I looked at the budget book and it's a little more, 1.7 million less in outside revenue next year. That has to be made up with the tax rate. The tax rate presented to the voters was just based on the increase in the operating budget. Unfortunately, the budget book didn't even have the final numbers. I wanted to try to check these numbers to make sure it was an accurate question. Unfortunately, nowhere on the district website are the final numbers there, because even the budget book has pending numbers. So I had to ask the question because I think the question was more of transparency.
Yeah.
I think the question was driven by, we need to be able to go to a piece of paper and say, what's the total increase looking like, not how much each article is. So I can understand why you don't have the answer, because even I couldn't accurately get it based on the
Yeah.
information. But I thought the question deserved to be asked, because it does go back to transparency.
Right, and so I would say, I think that comes down to communication from the board and making sure that, I mean, I am one person, so if I were elected onto the board, I'm not making decisions by myself. There's a team of people, a board of people that work together, plus, you know, the superintendent and many other people within the district. So we're not going to be suddenly like, oh, now our tax rate has increased despite what you voted for. That's a problem we'll have to figure out. Unfortunately, you know, since the economy blew back in 2007, 2008, the state and federal government have given much less money to our school district, which is why our taxpayers in our town keep feeling more and more every year, because that money was never put back. And when budgets are cut, that money typically never gets put back. So we keep feeling that burden. We're going to have to deal with it as best as we can, because the reality is we have kids that we need to educate and a limited amount of funds to do so. So we might have to make some hard decisions, but trying to deal with funding that we get from the federal and state government plus our taxpayers and working among all that is a really challenging job, especially when we're getting less and less from the state and federal government.
Okay. Thank you. Gary?
Well, certainly, when the revenue isn't coming in, then you need to make it up somehow, and whether you start looking to find efficiencies or to change statutes so that you get more flexibility and save money. For instance, in Administrative Rule 321, it dictates the size of a classroom. At the high school right now, your classroom has to be 800 square feet. That's 32 square feet per student, which allows for 25 students in a classroom. If you haven't got 25 students in a classroom, if you've only got 15 students, you still need to maintain that 800 square feet. So, but in that rule, there is no provision for waiver. So I think one of the things that we could be doing is going to our state representatives, our state senator, and looking to put a waiver in there so that when you have a classroom that's less than the maximum that they're dictating, that we can go in and put up our argument saying, let us have a classroom that's smaller than that. That leaves a lot more flexibility in your space, which converts over to cost. As I understand it right now, the budget is up. The tax rate is going to be something like 10%. I will push back a little bit on the town not receiving funds, because in the last state budget, we had about a $530 million surplus, and we gave back over $500 million to cities and towns. In fact, Milford received over $881,000 in swept money. That's a statewide property tax relief. District 11 as a whole, they had over $4 million come back. But we left that to the school boards, we left that to the selectmen. We at the state level, we didn't tell them how they had to spend their money. So part of the transparency I think that you're talking about is when this money comes in, people might be willing to know where it's being spent. They hear about it coming in, but
Okay.
I think there's numerous places that I've seen that allow transparency to be more visible, even in the presentations that we received at the deliberative session this year. They were significantly different than some I've seen in the past, where they kind of went line by line and I forget what the class by class, so that to help you better understand the budget.
Thank you.
I
Judy.
think that that 1.7 million is definitely an issue that has been discussed in the past. And I clearly remember, I think it was last month or maybe 6 weeks ago, that Mr. Basselier and Ms. Fortson, our business administrator, had a pretty lengthy discussion during a board meeting about this. And Mr. Basselier used the 10% increase based on in part on this $1.7 million deficit in revenue. And so we were clearly aware of that. It appears that we will be able to, quote unquote, make that up. We have consistently it's such a difficult concept when you say we returned money to the taxpayers, and we have for several years in a row. Our expectation is that won't change this year. It's just the way budgeting process for schools works. You always have to budget ridiculously above what you usually end up spending, let's say for a new teacher. We budget for someone with a master's and 5 years of experience, and yet most of our teachers are younger and newer and come in far less expensive than a teacher who's been here for 30 years. So I don't think that this is something that we have neglected to look at. I do think that Mr. Basselier and Ms. Fortson sort of talked this out, and it felt like it was, statistics, and it just, depending on how you want to use those numbers, it may be more problem than we thought, but I think that we have been, I do believe we've been transparent with our discussion of this with Ms. Fortson and Mr. Basselier both, who really both gave very clear statements about their position.
Thank you. The only other budget question I received: do you commit to returning the unexpended fund balance to the taxpayers to offset the double-digit school tax rate increase? And if not, then why not? Oh, Gary, I'm sorry, you're first.
Okay. Yes, I mean, for many years I have fought to give the surplus that the school has had, which is normally in the range of $500,000. And I understand it has exceeded that now, but I have been in favor and have tried giving that back to the taxpayers. But unfortunately, it seems like we get a very low attendance at school district meetings, and people haven't learned that the deliberative session is where you can change the budget. That when you get to the ballot, it's too late then. So I remember one year where I think it was $600,000, and we kept trying to chop it all the way back to the point where they wouldn't even agree to return 100,000 back. So I will remain committed to trying to give back to the people the money.
Thank you. Judy?
I think there are a couple of issues here, and one being there are people in town who say, well, we voted that budget in, and that budget should be used for the schools and for the students. That was our expectation when we voted for it. On the other hand, there are times when there is a huge amount of money left. We have, I think, been pretty mindful in the past at using it as wisely as we could to do repairs, maintenance that was long overdue, to repair buildings and sidewalks, roofs, heating systems, doing improvements that have been put off for a really long time. And I think that we have also still returned a pretty substantial sum of money back to the town. Ms. Fordson said at I'm trying to remember her exact figures, but I know last year it was $1 million, I think, and the year before that even more. The other position, which I find really interesting, is that one of our constituents, residents, was talking about the fact that giving that money back to the town, giving that money back to the taxpayer doesn't even feel like a big deal to them. He said, keep the money, use it for the schools. It doesn't make that big a difference on my tax bill. So we really have those two positions. And I think that what we try to do is walk the line between taking care of what needs to be taken care of in our district and making sure that we're giving back as much as we can and not overspending just because the money's there.
Very good. Thank you. Amy?
I think that when you consider that we have year upon year of money left over, right? But we also have year upon year of deferred maintenance that has now put us in a situation that feels untenable, right? We have major builds that we need to do because we've got some real issues within our facilities. So I think similar to Judy actually is that if there's money left over, the taxpayers voted it in, we should do what is fiscally responsible to maintain our school district. So if that means that we need to spend some of it to fix things properly, then that's what we should do. If there's money left over after that, great. But our school buildings are crumbling. We have major expenses that we're going to need to do because of years of deferred maintenance. So we have to address that. If a budget is voted in, then I think it's our responsibility to use it responsibly, but not overspend unnecessarily.
Thank you. Next question. Do you support the $2.8 million bond for renovating Bales? And why should that be a higher priority than solving the high school space issue? And Judy, I think you're first.
I do actually believe that we should spend the $2.7 million on Bales. That's been a year-long discussion, and we have this particular board that put it forward. We have hashed this out over a year, trying to find spaces for very specific reasons. And this seemed the best solution because we own a building, and that building has a great deal of space in it. And so over the last year, the discussion has been, how do we take care of the pressing needs? And so that's what Bales is going to address. There are plans that we will be talking about after this election, I think. We are still discussing how we're going to deal with the ATC and MHS and take advantage of what we hope will be some funding from the state for the ATC. That was part of a timeline that we set up several years ago when we worked with the architects. The Bales building really is like in the last year when we said we weren't going to build an SAU building or the garages, that we had to come up with other solutions for space issues. Bales seems like the best use of money at this point. It wasn't something in that plan that we made that was like a 5-year plan on how to address the high school and the ATC. So I think it's all part of the, the timeline got bobbled a little bit. So.
Okay. Amy?
I definitely support renovating Bales because there's a lot of opportunity that we have in the space that we own, and it is way less expensive to renovate than it is to do new construction. Just thinking about making revenue for our school district, if we turned Bales into our full-time district project drive and brought in students from other districts, which out-of-district placements cost anywhere between $75,000 to $150,000 per student. So if we had local school districts sending us kids and paying us $100,000 a kid to educate them because we have our own appropriate program for them, which we do, Project Drive, and we had our own school for them. There's a out-of-district placement right in Amherst that does something similar. It's only grades 5 through 12, but we could have our own, and that would make some revenue. So we have to start by renovating the building, making it up to code. I like the idea that right now we're not doing every single spot. That I believe the second and third floor are not going to be fully done. They'll do the windows and HVAC and all of that, but we'll leave second and third floor till we know what else we're doing. So I think the ability to have the space and use it is super important, and the idea of making money from it too, I think sounds awesome.
Thank you. Gary?
Thank you. Yes, I support the 2.7 renovation because I think foresight went into it. From time to time, you have a bump in population and a grade that you need to accommodate as it goes through the system. And with the plan that was laid out, it feels like that discussion had been taking place, and that the movement that they're suggesting happen was well thought out. In fact, will save us $70,000 in transportation cost because you're not going to have to shuttle kids from one school to another.
Thank you. Next question. What is your position on the need to either renovate or replace the high school? Amy, you're first.
Yeah, I figured. That's why the big sigh. We need to do something, and I'm not going to say we need to renovate or we need to replace. I need to know more information about what our two options are. I'm not going to say, oh yeah, we got to just tear the whole thing down. If that's not the smart choice, if renovation and then adding on is the better financial plan, then let's do that. If we need to knock the whole thing down and start over, let's do that. But I feel like that's probably going to be the more expensive option. We need to fix it, bottom line, and we need to move it into this century where we have kids learning not just to go to college, but for trade school and for all different things. And we need to make that learning environment for them. Not only that, by renovating it, it's going to be a draw to our town because people will want to come and live in Milford because they want their kids to go to school here. And so if we make the best possible learning environments for our students with the best possible staff, then let's do that.
Okay. Gary?
As I understand it, input is still being solicited on the LaValle Bressinger architect's plan. And while I've reviewed those documents, I also understand that there are other state requirements coming down the line in the process that need to be factored in. And as such, I don't feel I've got enough information yet to determine whether I'm pro-project or con project. But included in the unknown is the understanding that the state would be requiring that the classes we offer at the CTE be those classes or those occupations that would help solve the worker shortage problem we have in New Hampshire. Based on that, I don't even know what that list is or will be at the time. Furthermore, the district is projecting that there'll be approximately $17 million coming in CTE support. That project would be included in the capital budget, yet it's questionable where or if that 17 million will be in the capital budget, or if the item will even be high enough in the capital budget to be considered, because the state treasurer normally dictates or recommends to the capital budget committee, which I chaired for a term, that capital budget spending not exceed usually around $125 million. And I know we had this problem with the court. That's why it took us almost 20 years to get the court built in Milford, because they kept pushing it down. It wasn't until we got in the right positions where we forced the hand and said, this is going to get done. We got the design money in one year, and that got it going the next year. So there's a lot in the capital budget process, which I'm familiar with, that I think is real iffy right now. And until we see what that is, I think that's a real unknown that we're going to have to deal with when it is known.
Okay. Thank you.
I
Judy?
think that when a few years ago, it was 3 years ago, that we had the district, that the architects came, we had and I'm forgetting the name of what we call it, but we had a study done on our entire district, each school.
Feasibility study.
Pardon?
Feasibility?
The feasibility study, thank you, just blanked that word.
Gotcha.
I don't use it anywhere but at a school board meeting. So we paid to have a feasibility study so that we could figure out this plan of action over a period of years. And I think, as Mr. Daniels points out, there are so many unknowns. When we first started talking about that, construction in and of itself, just the materials, we got these estimates, but they said, but don't count on those estimates in 3 or 4 years. So these huge unknowns. Then we discover we need to have CTE programs, that the state will let us know what programs we need to have. And yet nobody denies that Milford High School needs to be updated. There are some real issues with the physical space. The problem is money. When we talk about, taxpayers and the budget, that's a lot of money. I mean, it's a really difficult decision, and it's one that the taxpayers will need to make when the time comes. I truly believe that renovating at least the ATC would be a boon to the town in general, but I think both the high school and the ATC would definitely impact the value of homes in Milford. And our architectural firm gave us very specific figures about that. So what we have is this balancing act of how much money to spend, what's going to be required, how is this going to impact property values, taxes. There's just a lot going on here, and there's a lot unknown still. And really on the timeline, I think we're talking about public information sessions beginning next year. And we do have a steering committee that's still looking at options on how we can accomplish what we're doing. This has more moving parts than I could ever imagine. This is like a 10,000 piece puzzle. But it's just the responsibility of trying to figure out how to move forward and do best for our kids.
Okay. Thank you. Next question. What role, if any, do you believe that parents have in affecting the educational program of study taught to their children? Gary, I think you're first on this one.
I know one thing that we have been experiencing is a declining enrollment at the public schools. And I believe in part that is because the system is failing to meet the expectation that the parents have for the education of their children. And therefore, they'll take them and they'll put them out in alternate schooling. So I believe that if we can address the role of education such that we are meeting the expectation of parents, and I think they ought to have a greater voice. I think the parents ought to be more involved in their children's education. I believe the school board needs to listen to the parents as to what they want. And again, it's all part of this working as a team, listening to the parents, the teachers, the students, the administrators, the board, and coming together as one group to work for the benefit of the students. But I believe that it's a mistake leaving the parents out of the equation, and I think we ought to be listening to them more and then working with our staff to put in place a project that's going to meet them. Because if you're meeting the expectation of the parents, you're neutralizing the argument that they're giving for having to take their children out of the public schools and put them in alternate schools.
Thank you. Judy?
I need to answer this question two different ways. I need to answer it first as a school board member. And we talk about micromanagement. And so I think that Amy mentioned earlier that there's a way of approaching an issue with school. And so that's to go to the teacher, and then the principal, and then the superintendent, and then the board. And I think that that's an important process. That's what's written in the policy. That's what we try to do. You start at the first level. You don't go to the school board level. But when people do talk to us on the school board level, we usually contact the superintendent and try to, have them follow that through. That's as a school board member. As a teacher, there is no single more important person to be involved in their child's education than their parents. As a school board member, I have 2,000 kids to think about. As a teacher, I had 175 kids to think about. As a parent, I had 2. And when parents are involved in their kids' education, it makes a world of difference. We should be listening to parents. We should be talking to parents. We should have their input. I would never want to put a child in a classroom where they felt that what was being discussed was so far out of their comfort zone that they couldn't be taught easily. And so I think that that's important. And parents are the people who should be involved. Parents and teachers on the ground level. The board at a slightly different level. But like I said, we usually, when we get an email or a complaint, we usually just send it back to where it needs to be so that it gets followed up more effectively than a board member could do. Thank you.
Thank you. Amy?
Similar to what we're saying here. Basically, I think that parents are the primary teachers for their students. I mean, from birth on, you're teaching your child all different things, including how to behave and how to interact appropriately with others. You expose them to a lot of different perspectives. And then, they end up in public school where there are a ton of standards that, students need to, basically demonstrate proficiency on, and so teachers have this wide range of knowledge and skill that they need to impart on these children. And there's many different ways to do that. And I think if parents have any kind of concerns, then you communicate and talk to people, starting with the teacher, and then the principal, and then the superintendent, and then the school board. But typically, if you just communicate your concerns, they tend to get resolved. And especially if we all approach it from a position of, hey, help me understand this. Because then when you come from that wanting to know more, typically it inspires better conversation. And sometimes maybe the teacher's answer is, oh, I'm not sure why we're doing that, but and it can be changed. Parents also have the option when it comes to things, they can opt out of things. That's something you can do. If you don't want that particular thing taught to your child, then whatever it is, then you can opt out. That's something you're able to do. And if all those options don't work for you, then unfortunately you would have the worst case scenario, which is pulling your student out of our district. And for me, that's worst case, because we are here to educate students. So pulling them out of school and sending them to either private school or homeschooling them perhaps. But ultimately, we do need to work together. Parents are part of that. We can't run a school district without parents. But I think if we try to work from a communication standpoint and an understanding point of view, I think we'll have a lot less problems.
Thank you. The next question: do you believe the district's educational philosophy should be to maximize each student's learning results to the best of each student's capabilities, or to initiate an educational philosophy to achieve equity in student results? Judy, you're first on this one.
Oh, of course. Wow. That's a really good question, first of all. I really
By the
feel
way,
like...
I had several come in basically the same general.
And I understand
idea,
perfectly,
yeah.
because it's such a tough, it's a really tough concept to, I think that, I can only talk about my philosophy. And my philosophy is that every student should be achieving to the best standard they can. I have a grandchild with a disability, and he will never achieve at the same level as another child. But but what he achieves is magnificent. And what Milford School District did for him when he lived here was magnificent. And I just think we need to be really careful. We talk about plans for each kid, and I think we really need to be paying attention to what each child needs. I think trying to find equity or even equality is illusional. Some kids, it just, things come easier, and so we should be challenging them more. But that doesn't mean that for someone who is already challenged, that we should be challenging them the same way. You try to meet them where they are. You try to get to the place where it's going to work for that student, that class. And I really think that philosophically, I believe every student needs to achieve to their best level of achievement.
Thank you. Amy?
Yeah. So I have always believed that every student has a unique potential, and there's different ways to measure that potential. I do feel like for most, a standardized test is perhaps not the best way to measure a student's skills or abilities. I think there's a lot of other things that you could do. I spent the majority of my career working in standards-based education schools. So you teach to the standards, you get proficient on those standards, you focus on those learning goals, and it becomes more individual because then you're focused on the exact skills that they need to have for success. So I think that you need to collect data, honestly, in order to see how students are doing. And if they're not doing so great, you need to then intervene, give intervention of some kind, and help them with whatever it is that they need help with. And whether that's behavior, or that's social emotional growth, or social pragmatics, like understanding how to be a good human to others and not say maybe perhaps naughty words at times, because sometimes kids do that. And I feel like COVID might have made that a little worse because I forgot how to talk face to face. I work in a high school, so I feel like they're acting a little bit more like middle schoolers nowadays than what I traditionally expect high schoolers to act. Anyway, like, we need to focus on what they need. And the only way you can do that is by understanding the students, gathering data on what their skills are, and then intervening appropriately, giving the students what they need. Parents shouldn't have to fight so hard to have their student get the help that they need. And we have an amazing staff that genuinely cares about our students. We need to give them that room to give that support. Whether we need coordination of how to do those tiered interventions, maybe we need to look into that regard. And we also need to focus on positive outcomes. Instead of being punitive, like, let's focus on what are the good things we're doing, how do we maximize positive growth, instead of say, oh, well, you're not doing this over here. But ultimately, all of our kids are capable of success, but that looks different for every single one. And so we, as a school district, need to make sure we're doing everything we can to support whatever dreams and goals that they have and give them the skills and knowledge they need to achieve those.
Thank you. Gary?
Yeah, we need to give students the best education that they're capable of. A lot of this goes back to the staff, because we have the staff that I believe have the capability to determine in each individual child the extent to which they can grow educationally. But I think we have a problem that we somehow need to get rid of the things that are distracting from education and empower the teachers, the guidance counselors and such, to be able to look at those individual students to determine what they are capable of, and then allow the teachers the flexibility of teaching to that student, so that you haven't got somebody who might be accelerated that's sitting there getting bored waiting for somebody else to catch up. So a lot of it is just going in and reassessing the system that we have, and again, freeing up the staff to do what they're trained to do, and which is to teach and focus on getting that child the best education that's going to prepare them for the next step in their lifelong learning.
Thank you. Next question. Are you committed to keeping honors and advanced placement courses at the high school?
Yeah.
Amy?
Sorry, yes. I think that's all part of the different challenges that students need. So absolutely, having AP classes are important. Having Head Start classes where they can earn college credit in addition to AP courses. There's a lot of different pathways that students can get that step ahead. But not only that, if we have advanced sort of CTE type of programs that they can graduate high school with some sort of certificate that gets them a job, that they're now a skilled worker in whatever field that is. Let's do that. So let's not only focus on honors and accelerated academic courses, but what about the tech and ed courses as well? Like, both of those things need to occur.
Thank you. Gary?
Yes, I'm fully in support of that. In fact, we have one of the policies that actually will limit somebody. If somebody was actually doing really well and wanted to take something, there is a policy in there that says you can't take more than this. And I think we need to review those type of things. I don't think we ought to be slowing a child down in their learning if they have the capability of going forward. Let's let them run.
Thank you. Judy?
I think AP and honors, I think this is a really controversial question, which some people may not realize, but it's, I mean, it's something that's been batted around for a while in educational circles. And I think not to have AP and honors is to disregard the students who are highest achieving. I think that's incredibly important. We need to offer that opportunity. When I went to high school many years ago, we had no AP courses, we had no honors track. And I can say that I think bright kids were just left behind and bored. And it's really difficult. You've got to be able to give kids challenges. But all kids need challenges, not just AP honors kids. But to take that away from them would just be unfair.
Thank you. And a likely follow-on to that one, would you support reestablishing gifted and talented programs for the middle school? Gary, you're up first.
I would consider it. I don't particularly like the name gifted and talented, because if you're going to label a particular class as gifted and talented, what's that saying about the rest of them, that they're not? So, while I support the program, I don't like the name, and I think there's a way that we can come up with something that provides the challenges that they need, while not making it sort of a slight to the others.
Okay. Judy?
Yeah, I know that the Budget Committee has discussed this and have the same frustration with other people, that gifted and talented is a very limited amount of people. And particularly when you're in a middle school where kids are still developmentally, trying to figure things out. And I know that we are talking about taking the position that was left by that's one of our middle school teachers is retiring, and he did an industrial arts kind of program. And using that as sort of a gateway to the CTE to allow students to begin to see possibilities as they continue their education further. I do think that gifted and talented does leave a huge swath of kids who feel like they're not gifted or talented. And I think that that is difficult. I think that we should be working hard to come up with challenges for those kids who are gifted and talented and ways of engaging them. I'm not opposed to the program so much as I would like to see something wider, so that lots of kids could participate in something that would allow them to recognize their own strengths and then build on those.
Thank you. Amy?
Yeah, I agree with Gary about the name. I think can be a bit off-putting. I think the word we might be looking for is enrichment. We need activities and learning experiences for all students so they can enrich their learning and strengthen it and go farther with whatever those skills are. And as Judy said, I would want it wider though, because when you traditionally think of gifted and talented, you think about math, science, reading, that type of thing. But why wouldn't it be tech ed as well, or art, or music, or any of these things? These are all important skills for them to have, as well as your traditional academic subjects. So to have an enrichment program that pretty much any kid could access, because you may not be the best at math, but what if you're an incredible artist? And there's enrichment opportunities available for you to develop your art, and then you end up in maybe graphic design in high school, and becoming a graphic design artist. I think that those opportunities for kids to explore their interests and their strengths are incredibly important. So having some form of enrichment program, but across multiple areas, I think is what we need.
Thank you. You were the first one, okay. Not having James here, my notes are off.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. Would you support reintroducing student ranks and top 10 awards for the middle school? And Judy, I think you're up first.
I'm not sure that I am. And my reasoning is that this is developmental. Back a few years ago, I had some students who didn't want to go to the awards ceremony at school during the day. And they said, in effect, one of the paraprofessionals said to me, they basically watched the same 20 kids get the same 20 awards since middle school. And I think that middle school is such an incredibly fragile age group that the best we can do is help them understand what they're able to achieve. And I think when you start rating and ranking at that age, kids start to see themselves a certain way. All of a sudden okay, I'm number, I'm number 2, and that becomes a really important way to identify themselves. That may not be the right thing for number 2 to be thinking about. It really kind of boxes kids in. And I feel like when you're 12 or 13 years old, you don't want to be boxed. I don't want kids to be boxed in. I want them to feel like there's limitless potential. And I think by ranking, we tend to limit those kids who aren't the brightest in the class to start thinking that they're not good enough, not capable. And I think there's time later on, when kids get to high school and things start to shake out, that it becomes really obvious. And at that point, it's going to have impact on college. It has no impact on college in middle school. I just don't think it's psychologically a wise move for middle school students to be rated.
Thank you. Amy?
I would agree developmentally it's not appropriate. The kids go to the middle school and they start getting graded into the traditional sense, A, B, C, D, F. For the first time, our fourth grader is already worried about middle school because of that. She's a little anxious, so I will give that caveat every year. It's like, oh no, fifth grader, oh no, whatever. So, but to put a number on kids, I also think that puts a very strong focus on one part of their abilities. So great, you test well, hooray for you. But what about all the other skills that they have? And when you only focus on that numerical ranking, then as Judy said, you're leaving a lot of kids out. Kids that have amazing strengths in other areas. Maybe they have incredible leadership skills. Maybe they're really great with their hands and are great at building things. Maybe they build robots. I don't know what they do. But even still, that kind of skill would not show up on a numerical ranking like that. And we don't need to put that pressure. There's so much changes happening during that age span of 6th to 8th grade. Their bodies are changing. There's a lot of things happening. And so to add that additional stress is just not necessary. I think awards are great, but let's give awards that are meaningful in a lot of different areas, not just, you're the best reader for the year or whatever it is.
Thank you. Gary?
Yeah, I would not support such a program. And the reason is that, you've got 3 levels. You have the elementary, you've got the middle, and you've got the high school. So you're talking about middle schoolers. And at the point of where you're starting to give them a number on something, I'm looking at I'd like to create a system that each student is excited to go from one grade to the other. And what keeps them excited and what keeps them engaged are the things that we talked about before. It's presenting them with the challenges that will keep them excited, and they're not going to be worrying about whether they're number 1 or number 2 or 3, but they're going to be excited to see what's next in the learning. So I think if we structure the program more around the incentives to succeed and to push yourself, I don't think we have to get caught up. I think it's just a distraction when you start ranking.
Thank you. Next question. Do you agree with the current block scheduling model we use at the high school, and why?
Oh, block schedules. So it just depends. As an English teacher, I can tell you, when I taught 4 blocks a semester, so it was like 90-minute classes, not only was it exhausting, because I had to teach 3 in a row and then my plan block was 4th, but that's a side note. To teach English, for example, in one semester, a year-long course, is really challenging to get through the amount of text that you would like to do. So I prefer a modified block schedule if you're going to do that, because, for example, if you had Monday was, if you have 8 classes in a year, for example, Monday would be 1 through 8, and then Tuesday, Thursday would be 1 through 4, and Wednesday, Friday would be 5 through 8, and so you're still having those longer sections, but you have a shorter section on Monday, and then you have a little bit of time between each other. So as an English teacher, I can say it makes it a little bit more manageable to get through multiple texts because there's just more time between classes. And I think that block scheduling is great because you need to get labs and whatnot in. I went to high school that had a block schedule, but it was mostly short blocks, and then there was one day that had longer blocks that alternated every week. There's many different ways to do it. I think the one thing I would like to see is a rotating number, because sometimes you hate math and don't want to do it first thing in the morning or last thing. And if block 1 is always first thing and block 8 is always last or whatever, that's not ideal. So when it rotates a little bit, so sometimes 8 is first and then it's last and then it's in the middle. If I'm making any sense, I don't know. But I hope I am. I think it is good. I think there's ways to do it. And I think that just doing it because we've always done it that way, or we've done it that way for a while, is not necessarily the answer. Perhaps it could use a little bit of adjustment, but talking to the staff and the students and parents as well would be helpful when you make a decision, like changing the schedule.
Thank you. Gary?
I fear that this is one of those questions that you're never going to have everybody happy with. In fact, I believe that there was a study done, and the answers were very interesting, because you had everything from students saying, I like block scheduling because it gives me more time to comprehend the things that I need to learn, so I learn a little bit better, to those who said, well, no, I don't like block scheduling because it makes the day change faster and seem to go faster, to the parents who like block scheduling because it serves as a childcare for them until they can get out of work and come back. So I think it's something that the board would need to go back, talk with the administrators and the teachers. Ultimately, I think it needs to be about what is best for the student. And again, I'm not sure that you're going to have everybody on board with one way or the other. I didn't have block scheduling when I went through Milford High, and didn't even think about it at that time. So, I think in interest, though, we really need to find out what best is going to help the student learn.
Thank you. Okay, we are down to around 20 minutes left.
Oh, you forgot Judy.
Oh, I'm sorry,
That's okay.
Judy.
It's all right. It's all right.
He really wants to talk about block scheduling.
Yeah, we did do a preliminary study on block scheduling just recently. And truly, this is one of those situations where we cannot possibly make everybody happy. It is just not going to happen. I think block scheduling works really well for some subjects and not as well for others. And I think that we have to be really cautious. There are just so many working pieces here about, we don't want to confuse kids with schedules that are so convoluted they can't figure out what day it is. If it's Tuesday, am I supposed to be in science? We want to make sure that we do something that really meets the needs of the majority of students. And I think that this is a topic that we need to continue to talk about. Just because we've done it for 20 years doesn't mean it can't be in some way modified or tweaked. But it also has to have all the stakeholders, the parents, the students, the administration, the teachers. Everybody that is impacted by this needs to be involved in the discussion. And I think it needs to be a way bigger discussion than we've had thus far.
Thank you. Okay, we are down to about 20 minutes left.
Mm-hmm.
And I now have to get to probably the most controversial questions I received. It was probably the one topic where I got the most suggested questions, and it was kind of difficult to put them all in one format. So here goes, and Gary, you lose on being the first one on this one.
Short straw.
Would you favor or oppose laws or policies that make it illegal for public school districts to teach about gender identity in grades K through 8, and if not, what grade would you support to start teaching about gender identity?
Well, this goes back to the communication thing I was talking about in the beginning, is that I think with whatever policy we come up with as to whether you allow it or don't allow it or whatever, I think we need the input. And what I have seen so far is communication, again, that is one way, trying to get some guidance from the parents as to how they feel about it, but the board isn't asking the questions. I think that needs to change so that you can have that dialogue and try to work it out, because while students present themselves well on their statements on why they believe something, those statements leave themselves open for questions to maybe dig down for the board to ask questions on things that the presenter maybe hasn't thought about before. So I don't know what is the right place. I don't feel that the board should go forward with that without having a true discussion on it and a dialogue. And I'm not talking about just a dialogue night. I think it needs to be an ongoing dialogue. I mean, we do this as selectmen. Somebody comes in with an issue, we'll talk about it, even if it's going through the agenda. But it's that dialogue that makes things work. It's a dialogue that helps us reach compromise on things, come to an understanding of one another, and ultimately maybe we don't agree on it, but at least I think we come away feeling that it's not just we've heard one side of it and that there isn't the other side. So,
Thank you. Judy?
I think this is a situation where education is on the bleeding edge of change in culture and society. This isn't something we would have even discussed 20 years ago. It wasn't even on our radar. There was no consciousness. And so I think we're starting off in pretty uncharted territory. I think that there are many, many misunderstandings about gender identity and about how we present as educators in the town of Milford. I think that we clearly do need a whole lot more communication. But I also know that people were angry about what they saw as gender training for teachers, and that they felt that teachers were being instructed to be supportive of people who identified differently. And the bottom line was that was a reaction to an Office of Civil Rights complaint when we actually had violated the rights of a transgender student in the past. So this is murky stuff, and we are on the edge of what we need to do. I don't know that I could answer a question on when I think would be an appropriate discussion, because I think, once again, we go back to the way that children mature, and some children self-identify very early. Others don't self-identify until they're adults, well into their adult years. And so I think there's no time to say, okay, this is when we're going to talk about it. I don't know when that time is. I don't think I have enough knowledge or information to know exactly when that time is. And I think it's developmental, and I think it needs to be handled well, and it needs a lot of stakeholder involvement.
Thank you. Amy?
I can speak to the K-12 literacy standards that at no point says that you should be teaching really anything that specific. It does want you to teach about perspective taking, right? And being able to critically think and understand, right? So as far as an age, I can also think about myself as an educator of 18 years. Anytime there's any kind of controversial subject, even you want to watch a movie, you want to watch the beginning scenes of Saving Private Ryan. Typically there's a form you need to, I think we've all seen that, it's an old now, but there's a form you need to fill out to send home as like a permission slip, right? So there's communication involved with the teacher saying, hey, we're going to show this controversial, perhaps scary thing to these students, let us know if you have permission. So I think communication is key. I can say that there's never been a time in my teaching career, nor is there anyone that I know of in all the different places I've worked, that is like, we're teaching gender identity right now. Like, that's not a thing. Does it come up in conversation? Yes. Is there different perspectives that people have? Yes. And I think that when it comes to when you talk about it, I don't think that there is actually a plan for that, because again, it's not something that it's not part of the teaching standards. It's not something you teach. I think with anything that's sensitive, I think it's important to know your audience, make sure it's developmentally appropriate, and have communication about it. Just the same reason why parents can opt out of, say, for example, sex ed classes. If you communicate about what you're doing, I think it helps people understand why. But I don't think there's any specific age per se. I wouldn't know what that is, and it wouldn't be a decision I for sure would be making. All I want to teach my students is to be understanding, to recognize that there are other perspectives other than your own. You may not understand that perspective, but that's okay. You just need to know that these other walks of life exist. And I think as a teacher, that's your main job, is to teach that sort of open-minded ability to see things from different shoes.
Thank you. Next question. What do you think the policies should be regarding the use of bathrooms and locker rooms in regard to gender?
Oh, okay. I think that we have a procedure, because there is state and federal law that already sets how we're supposed to handle situations like that. This has been obviously the hot topic of the last couple of months, and I'm still going to stand firm where I am, which is that our current procedure is in line with state and federal law. We are doing what the government says we're supposed to do. If people don't want that to happen, they have the ability to change the legislature. They have the ability to talk to the people who make the laws. But right now, as a school board member, I don't want to be an activist. I don't want to put the town in danger, which I have been told by 2 different attorneys we would do if we didn't comply with the laws. And I just think there are so many repercussions to not complying with federal and state law that it would just be irresponsible for us to try to go around the current laws. I really can't. I think there are 2 levels here, and I am talking about my responsibility as a board member. I have a fiscal responsibility, I have a responsibility to all the students, and I have a responsibility to take the legal advice of our lawyers.
Thank you. Amy?
The bottom line is you need to follow the law. You can't discriminate against people. You can't segregate people. So I think that as long as our policies are in line with what the law says, the state and federal laws, then that's great. And that's why we have legal counsel to help make sure that whatever policies we make, regardless of the topic, that we are following those laws. When it comes down to concerns about bathroom use, I think that we need to make sure that we address behaviors. If someone is bullying another student, no matter where they are, whether it's the bathroom, the locker room, the gymnasium, the classroom, you address the behavior. You address the child that is creating this problem and address the behavior. If you have someone doing something inappropriate, no matter where you are, whether it's, like I said, the classroom or whatever, or the bathroom or the locker room, you address behaviors. Because that's how you make change, and how we as a school teach what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And ultimately, bathrooms are for going to the bathroom. So generally, let's focus on that. And I think a bigger concern about our bathrooms right now perhaps is vaping more than anything else. My goodness, I don't know if we're ever going to win that one. But I just think the bottom line is, for us as a school board, we need to follow the law. I do not want to spend taxpayer money on lawsuits.
Gary?
While I agree that we need to follow the law, I'm going to go back and say that communication, again, is the vast majority of our problem here, because when someone claims that they're discriminated against because they can't use the bathroom that they want, is that the level where we're talking about discrimination, or should it be that you have options? Because as I understand it, we have given everybody an option where they can use it, and that there are some, a small minority, that don't want to use that. But if someone were to come and say, no, because you are this, then you can't use any bathroom, that's discrimination. But if they say that, okay, you can't use this, you can't use this, but you can use this, and they say, well, I don't want to use that, is that discrimination or is it not? And so I think, as we need to communicate and decide what in fact is discrimination. Is it because somebody isn't getting what they want when you've already made the accommodations for somebody? I know in the 5,000 section of our policies, we have a whole thing in there on the rights of transgender. But that whole thing conflicts with at least a half dozen other policies that we have that say that a student cannot disrupt a class. So if you have someone of an opposite sex go into a locker room, and now because you have made those people feel uncomfortable because you're invading their privacy, that isn't taken into consideration in the policies. But the fact that now the classes are late getting to the next class because of changes that have to be made, is that a disruption of class? I would say that it is. So I think, again, I keep going back to communication, but I think if we can work as a group and communicate and come on the same page as to an understanding of what these things are, square away the policy so that they don't conflict with one another, I think we might be able to come out with a plan that will in fact be legal, but may be understandable to everyone too.
Okay, thank you. All right, this will be the last question on this one. If we can get through this one quickly, I really love to slip in another question so we don't end on this topic.
Thank you.
And Amy, you're first.
Great.
Are you committed to keeping urinals open for biological males?
Oh,
As a female who's never had to use a urinal, I find them weird, personally. I find the whole concept bizarre. But I guess people who can use a urinal enjoy it. I don't know. I don't know why they do that. I would go into a stall. I find it weird. So I'm not going to limit options for the people who can use a urinal because I don't know. Like I said, I don't get it myself. I don't. But if that's what they want to use, have at it. Enjoy. I don't know.
Gary?
Yes.
Judy?
I say this in jest, so please take it in jest. I was like the only member on the board who didn't know how many urinals we had, okay? But I think we made an error in judgment when we did that, but I think we corrected ourselves, and I believe that urinals should be open.
Just as an aside, Amy, go to a sporting event
Oh,
and look at the
God,
lines
no.
outside the ladies' room and the men's room.
Right.
That's why you need
Yes,
urinals.
yes. That's why you find the secret ladies' room that no one knows about and go to the smaller line.
Okay, we are basically out of time, but I do want to ask one. I don't want to end on those questions.
Yeah, thanks.
And this one comes up every year, a little controversial, a little fun. What is your position with respect to funding a turf field program for the high school stadium field? I think,
That's scary.
No.
I got to talk about urinals
Yes.
first.
Are we talking about artificial turf?
artificial turf, yeah.
I would say that it is a lower priority than the funding that we need to put into curriculum and other things that will advance people educationally.
Thank you. Judy?
I know in talking with people about the turf issue, that there is a group that is trying to fund the majority of the turf for the school outside of the tax. It wouldn't be simply a tax issue. So I know that that's part of their plan for the turf if they were if we were able to see that happen. I also know that putting down turf would not just be an expense, it would also be a profit maker. In that there are league sports that would be able to play there. We would not have any problem with maintenance of our fields anymore. And everybody who knows Milford knows they flood, they do, they dry out. We have a water ban, and we can't water the fields. So we would avoid those issues. And I do think, having talked to Kevin St. Ange, that he feels that we can get a real financial boost from other folks in town, and that there would be more stakeholders. And I know that he has definitely espoused and spoke to me about the profit that could come from these fields.
Thank you.
So I don't think it's our top priority
No.
at all. But I think that when you weigh out the cost of it versus what we're spending to maintain our fields for our teams, when you add in the fact that it's potentially a moneymaker, that perhaps it could be funded from outside funding that's raised in some other manner. Hey, if people want to donate a turf field, I'll say yes. Let's have a turf field. But besides that, it's just not my top priority. I do think sports are important. I played field hockey all through school, and turf is way better for field hockey than grass. The ball goes so much faster. But it's not my priority. I do see there could be some advantages. I think with more information, we can make informed decisions, and that's where I'm at.
Okay, thank you. Now's the time for each of our candidates to make closing remarks. I'm going to do it in the opposite order of the opening remarks. I would like you to try to keep your comments to 3 minutes. And again, basically summarizing why you would like voters to consider casting one of their votes for you. Judy, you're first.
Well, I think that I already made the statement about the fact that longevity of the school board members as well as longevity with the superintendent are important to student success. I think that's an incredibly important piece of information. I also believe that in 3 years, I've had a pretty steep learning curve, but I'm still working on it, and I attribute that to, in no small part, to the people around me who have been patient and kind and really generous with their support. And I know what we can say, what we can't say. I do believe that I still have much that I can offer, and I would like to continue to offer that. But I think the most important thing I can say right now is that you have 3 candidates. And the most important thing, in my mind, that an American citizen can do is to vote. Vote for whomever you feel will do the best job. That is the most power a single person can have, particularly in a town like Milford, where it's so small to begin with, and our population of people who turn out to vote in a local election is so small. You are getting a really big bang for your elected vote. And so I encourage people, the most important thing, whoever you decide to support, please come and vote. Come and vote on our positions, selectmen, and our warrant articles, because that is your absolute right and responsibility as a citizen. Thank you.
Thank you. Gary?
Thank you. And thank you for holding this forum tonight, Steve. For 32 years, I have been representing Milford in some capacity at the state, county, and local level. During that time, I learned parliamentary procedure and exercised that skill for 6 years as your school district moderator, ensuring the meetings were run smoothly and that each person had the opportunity to respectfully share their opinions with others. As your state senator for 6 years, your state representative for 18 years, and your selectman for 20 years, I learned how to run a public meeting, even on the hardest issues, without it turning into chaos, respecting each member's opinion, ensuring that the public had ample time to participate in the public meetings, and understanding ultimately that we needed to work together as a team. I previously served on Milford School Board, so this segment of local government is not unfamiliar to me. I'm now asking the chance to serve again on the school board, offering my experience and expertise to the work of the board in ensuring that Milford students have the educational expertise needed and are prepared for the next step in lifelong learning. With still many challenges to face in the next few years, I'll continue to seek creative, responsible, and common sense solutions to the tasks remaining before us. Solutions that will prepare our students educationally for their next step in their lives. We need to refocus our efforts on providing academic excellence to our students and preparing them for the next step in their lives. To do that, we need to fix the deficiencies in the line of communication, balance the academic offerings with the ability of taxpayers to support the programs, creatively open doors of opportunities, improve parental involvement in their child's education, and establish a culture of respect in the school system. These are the areas in which I have leadership and experience necessary to hit the ground running and enable the school district to achieve its goals. Working together as a team, I know that we can make a difference. I therefore respectfully ask consideration of your vote for the school board on March 14th. I thank you, and you can find more information on garydaniels.net.
Amy.
Okay, thank you. I think that as an educator, someone who's spent my entire career, with the exception of 2 years where I thought I was going to work for a bit and then go to law school. If I didn't like that, I'd teach. And my best friend was like, why don't you just start teaching? And I'm like, oh yeah. So I started teaching at 24 years old and started as an English teacher in a private boarding school, moved on to another private boarding school, worked at a private day school, then went into public school. So I've worked in, and the public schools I've worked in have been really rural, up, Rob and I used to like to say, almost in Canada. That was different. And then we moved back to civilization, so we're down here in Milford in civilization. And seeing all these different schools and seeing these different communities and knowing what it's like to be in the trenches as a teacher and to be an English teacher, a special educator, a specialist that focuses on reading and writing, and someone who has a degree in educational leadership, I know what it takes to make a great school community. I think that for us, we need to bring Milford back to where it was a few years ago. A few years ago, you could not get a job in Milford because no one was leaving. Everyone was happy. Like we were, maybe not everyone, there's always someone unhappy, but we were this great community that was really, finding a lot of success for our students. And we need to get back to that. So how do we do that? We need to work together. We need to stop arguing about things. We need to focus on kids. We need to listen to each other. And above all, we need to be kind and respectful. As Mr. Daniel said, we need to, as a school district, not only teach our students about their academic needs, but address their social emotional needs, their behavioral needs, teach them how to be good human beings. Because I don't know about you, but I've got 2 little girls, and sometimes the things that they come home from school with stories from school, I'm like, we need to work on being kind and raising our children, from now pre-K that we have through 12, as a community, as a team, together, listening to each other and focusing on doing what's best for our children. So as someone with experience as an educator, multiple degrees in education, and multiple different job experiences, I know I can bring all of that, plus my sense of humor, I think you've seen that a little bit tonight, and just compassion and kindness to help us get back where we need to be and actually go beyond. I'd love us to be number one in the state in all areas, not just academics.
Well, thank you. Amy Clark Canty, Gary Daniels, Junie Zano, thank you for your time this evening. I hope the Milford voters were able to get a lot of good information on your positions and help them vote. I do want to remind all the citizens of Milford, please make sure you vote. Our voting is Tuesday, March 14th. The polls open at 6 a.m., closing at 8 p.m. at Milford High School, 100 West Street. Please, as was stated by other candidates tonight, please show up and vote. Every vote is important. And with that, I want to thank the candidates one last time, and I want to thank the residents for listening in. I hope this forum was helpful. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.